All right, welcome back. So, tonight we're going to talk about the United States for Viti 305 Wines of the World. You might be thinking, of all the wine regions in the world, why are we starting in the United States? Well, it turns out our country is so freaking big. There are more winemaking regions than just California. And so we talk about some of these regions and some fun starts. It's also just a fun place to start as a baseline for everyone. So, without further ado, we'll just go ahead and jump in. So, fun facts: wine is made in every single state in the United States. Alaska, Hawaii, Minnesota, you name it. The top producing states are California, Washington, Oregon, New York, and Texas. I'll make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see. Don't worry, I'll share these slides so you guys can have them too. There's a little map from Wine Folly if you want to see. It's actually kind of cool because she pins out here the top varieties in each state as well. So like it says, Muscadine. Here are these orange states are Muscadine. We have Cab Sauv, Merlot and Riesling, Marquette, Riesling, Cab Sauv, Pinot Noir, Chardonnays, and anyways, I just think it's cool. And then Hawaii does make actual grape variety wine too, but they do make pineapple wine, so that's cool. We'll talk more about that later, but that's just for your information. Top varieties grown in the United States. There's so much diversity in the United States, especially here in the Sierra Foothills, right in our backyard. Sierra Foothills wineries produce over 75 different varieties, and there's a huge number of wineries too, and these are all small-scale wineries, producing this amazing resume of wines. But that's for the Sierra Foothills class, so I don't want to get ahead of myself. Leading wines in the United States include some things that you might recognize if you're a wine shopper on the shelves. So Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Bordeaux blends, Chardonnay. Chardonnay is a huge one for us, and so is Cab Sauv. Merlot, Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, Rhone blends, Sauvignon Blanc, sparkling wines, Syrah, and Zinfandel. Wines of note. Notifications. Wines of note that we do produce here too, but might be harder to find. Albarino, Barbera, Grenache, Muscat, Moscato, Petit Syrah, Petit Verdot, Port style wines, Riesling, and Viognier. So just depending which region you're in, might be easier or less easier, but these are definitely our leading wines. We make the most of these, and then you can find these, but they're not as mass distributed to other parts of the world like some of these other wines are. So, made in smaller quantities. So, the United States, according to, I think this statistic was taken in 2021, ranks 4th worldwide in wine production. It could still be that. We could be lower on the ladder now, but that's what it was a little while ago. Interestingly enough, wine has been a part of our history as an independent nation for a long time. So with the signing of the Declaration of Independence, that was actually celebrated and toasted with Madeira wine, which is a very sweet, fortified, oxidized wine that comes from Madeira, but that's another course subject too. President Washington would drink 3 to 4 glasses of Madeira every night before going to bed. He also distilled his own whiskey. And Thomas Jefferson was also a huge fan of wine. He took 3 months off to travel horseback across France for extended wine tasting. And he even wrote in his journal about all of his experiences and all that. So wine has been deeply rooted into our history and culture for a long time. And considering how young our country is compared to other regions, wine has been around for much, much longer than even that. So wine statistics for the U.S. Wine is a passion for only a small percentage of Americans, interestingly enough. So in 2012, this is an old stat. We need some more stats. I apologize. 25% of the American population drank 93% of the wine sold in the United States. So think about that. 1/4 of the population drank most all of the wine sold in the United States. And since the 1990s, wine consumption had been on the rise due to more information on potential health benefits of red wine. More recently, we're seeing a decline because there's a whole anti-alcohol movement going on with millennial and Gen Z drinkers. So these statistics will be different. I'll look into this, guys. Sorry. But it is interesting to talk about. 40% of adults in the U.S. do not drink any alcohol due to personal or religious views. So like I said, there's a whole non-alcohol movement, and you'll see big companies produce de-alcoholized wine, de-alcoholized beer, non-alcoholic seltzers, and there's a huge concern for inflammation and health, and also like sobriety, drunk driving, the effects of alcohol in general. I'm not a doctor, so take with what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but it's interesting to see where people are prioritizing their health and what things that they are willing to omit from their day-to-day life. So with that, I will say everything should be enjoyed in moderation, drink safely, but wine is still a fantastic beverage to go to for celebration or relaxation or just for fun, in moderation. So the United States has pretty humble beginnings on wine. We didn't just start making amazing wine from day one. We can trace it back to the early decades of the 17th century. Thomas Jefferson had seen in Virginia there was a plethora of native grapevines growing there already, so he was convinced that winemaking was a thing and that this country could produce wine. So just like that. And even in the gold rush and previous gold rush too, Europeans and early settlement would bring grapevines to the United States and try to produce wine, but it was very unsuccessful because of phylloxera. So this louse that lives in the dirt, it attacks the roots of these grapevines. It turns out that the grapevines that were native to America, or Native American grapevines, were resistant to this louse kind of thing, but the ones from Europe were not. So that's when we really had to start experimenting with hybridizing grapes and trying to develop wine that was successful. The grapes that are here in the United States originally did not taste good. They were not great for winemaking. They're great for like Welch's grape juice, other things, but they just didn't make the best of the wines. So we tried to take their characteristics and hybridize them with European grapevines to make something in between. So that was the goal. By the time the gold rush came along, people who were planting grapevines, they were doing it on self-rooted vines, and there was phylloxera issues, but because the gold rush was not so successful for so many people, you were better off being a farmer than being a miner. So that's the whole thing. So in the beginnings of early winemaking in the United States, we have our first historic winery in America. It's called Virginia Dare, and it was in about 1835 in North Carolina, and included wines like a white wine named Minnehaha, a red wine named Pocahontas, and they were made from what's called Scuppernong grapes. So Minnehaha was wrongly translated for a long time as laughing water, but it really means waterfall in Dakota. It was the fictional name of a character from a poem called The Song of Hiawatha in 1855. So that's where those names came from, which was kind of interesting. During Prohibition, the winery stopped producing wine and started using the alcohol to produce extracts instead. The company is still alive and well to this day and still continues producing extracts, which I think is really interesting, that a historical event can totally change a company's platform. And they're still doing it. It's crazy. So like all the flavors and all these products that you consume, like bitters and stuff, they're extracting flavors for these industries. So food, beverage, cocktails, smoothies, it's pretty cool. So if you want to check out their website, it's very nicely done. You can check out their extracts, their flavors, the applications, and it's actually pretty interesting. But that's where it happened to Virginia Dare over time. So Virginia Dare is the original ownership or the original business ended up falling apart in the 2000s, early 2000s. But then Francis Ford Coppola ended up purchasing the business or the name and then started his own Virginia Dare winery in Geyserville, California. So you can actually visit Virginia Dare. It's obviously not going to be the same wines. It's in Geyserville now, but there's a website to the winery here. I have all these fun links in my slideshows. So you can check it out. I mean, it's pretty cool. There's some fun history to it. Virginia Dare was the name of the first American-born. Why is it not in here? Oh, I thought it was in here. Well, Virginia Dare was the name of the first American-born child in the New World. So that's kind of where that name came from. But anyways, so moving from the traditional, the first winery that was in the United States to kind of East Coast to the West Coast. West Coast wine beginnings really started way back from Spanish, like Inquisition and exploration. So it's actually cited that Hernan Cortez brought over some of the first grapevines to Mexico. And then with the Spanish missionaries moving up towards Alta California and up the California coastline, with those missions being established, they needed grapes for sacramental wine, so thus the birth of the mission grape. So missions produce or plant mission grapes to produce mission wine. We do know that this variety is called Listan Prieto now through genetic research and DNA syncing. But it's still often referred to as mission. If you want to know some more of that route, specifically in 1629, there were two Spanish clergymen founded missions near present-day San Antonio, Texas, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then we have a Capuchin monk and a Franciscan priest. But these are some of the folks that were involved in the process of planting these grapes and taking cuttings and cultivating them for the beginning of what would be the wine industry on the West Coast. And this is really the first time we see on the West Coast vines being planted on purpose and cultivated for winemaking. There were already native grapes there, but this was the first time we saw winemaking purposefully done. Cool. So again, sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. Hernan Cortez was credited for bringing some of the first cuttings of those grapevines. But yeah, those grapes, mission grapes and missions were scattered across the coast. And that's, everyone had their sacramental wine, and that's how it started. So, and then fast forwarding to, we had the gold rush and then a couple other events, and we have Prohibition. Prohibition is a huge event in American history. And I have a video here from Oversimplified that you can watch if you want. And it's hysterical, and I recommend that you do, but you're not going to get quizzed on it. And it talks about the evolution of Prohibition and the parties involved. And it just talks about how people were just drinking excessive amounts of alcohol and just being drunk in public and doing crazy, stupid things. And, women came together and started a movement, and there were some extreme, policies made, lots of problems with immigration. And ultimately, what really kept the movement going was the Anti-Saloon League that was led by Wayne Wheeler, and then World War I came together to kind of spark put the nail in the coffin for Prohibition to happen. So the thing that you need to know is the Anti-Saloon League was involved, and the 18th Amendment was the constitutional ban of all manufacturing, sale, and transport of all beverages containing alcohol. This is a very depressing picture of some folks pouring alcohol down a drain while government officials are watching. And this movement went on a lot longer than some people realize. This was almost 14 years. So January 16th, it's my birthday, 1920 to 1933. So that is, it's almost, right? No, almost 14 years. Yeah, it started in January and ended in December. So almost 14 years. That's a long time. And then after that, the 21st Amendment had been passed, and it was a repeal of the 18th Amendment. So we were able to make alcohol again. It was really an interesting time because this is when you see a lot of speakeasies open up, and then the rise of the flappers and all this interesting cultural stuff in America. But you really see an uprise in mafia as well, and also people making alcohol at home too. So it's kind of like the birth of like home winemaking. You were allowed to make up to, I think, like 6 gallons or something, technically, very technically speaking, of wine during this time. And they would sell you like grape juice in a brick, and it would be like, do not add 5 gallons of water, do not add yeast, because then it will make alcohol. It was just a very strange time. There was also a huge spike in folks that were becoming priests, so that way they could sell alcohol in the back alleys, like in the black market, and make some cash on the side and have access to it. But it did affect the wine industry, but the big thing was beer. At the time, a lot of people just wanted to drink beer and spirits. So it was a very interesting time. But wineries did suffer. There were about 700 wineries in the country before Prohibition, and then it dwindled to 140. Excuse me. The only wineries that survived were making wine for religious purposes, or medicinal purposes as well. And after all that, it took 70 years for wineries to return into similar numbers, to get back to what this was. 70 years. That is a lifetime for some people. Hopefully we can live beyond that. But 70 years, that is a lifetime. And the industry suffered from devastating blows. So we had the Great Depression, phylloxera issues, which is that louse I was talking about, World War I, the Great Depression, and also World War II. So it was just it was a dark ages, I would say, for winemaking. And it wasn't until people like UC Davis started getting involved that winemaking in California really started to have a pulse again. So how did things kind of come back? So the original, starting to cultivate programs for grape growing, these were government subsidized programs that started at UC Berkeley, because Cal Berkeley was the original university. That's why they call it Cal. Before UC Davis was born, it started at Cal. And the program started there, and it was government funded because it was meant to stimulate the economy. So California has the most fertile soil, one of the most fertile soils like in the world. Like we are like class whatever USDA most fertile soils. And we know that grape growing and winery is successful before. And so UC Davis was doing all this research, and 1935 was the establishment of the program. And then we started to see some wealthy families starting wineries all over California. So 60s and 70s, we see Robert Mondavi and Gallo, I think, were part of that crowd. And starting to come together and invest into this educational system and invest in research. And then we started grafting plants, and then we weren't having phylloxera issues. And then we were planting test vineyards to see what varieties did well in what regions of California, and soil analysis and all these wonderful things to produce high quality wine and to make this industry boom. And it wasn't until 1976 that things really turned, that the lens of the world became focused on California, specifically Napa, because of the Judgment of Paris. So if any of you have seen Bottle Shock, it is kind of a cinematic, entertaining, loose documentary on what happened at the Judgment of Paris. And it wasn't just Chateau Montelena that was involved. There's also Stag's Leap and other wineries that had beat out French wines. But this was a huge monumental event where these winemakers from Napa beat French wines at a blind French competition with all French judges. That is a big deal, because French judges are going to have a taste for their own wines. So to have them score American wines higher than their own is shocking. So it was very historic. So Chateau Montelena is still a very big deal. Stag's Leap is still a big deal. Those are all wineries that are still alive and well. And this is the spark that started the modern wine industry in California. So check out the movie. It's fun. It's very good. Alan Rickman is amazing. So is Chris Pine and everyone else, really. It's a fun movie. So over time from that event towards more present day, this kind of shows the escalation of wineries in the United States. So we have California. Just look at how crazy these numbers are. From 1960 to 2012, we see numbers increase dramatically. 256 to almost 3,400, wineries. Up until 21, which is, still in the height of pandemic, over 4,700 wineries just in our state. And then for Washington, we see a huge growth too. Oregon became more popular. New York State is up there. Texas is on their way. And then Virginia is also on their way. Virginia does have their own wine growing regions. It's funny because Virginia has the Shenandoah Valley AVA, and we also have a Shenandoah Valley here in California, but we have to specify California Shenandoah Valley. So, anyways. So, it wasn't until, I believe, the 80s, with this huge explosion in industry and winemaking, that the government decided we need AVAs, we need wine designated regions to provide to provide a guideline for consumers and wine buyers. So we are mapping out regions that are specific for grape growing characteristics that have individual characteristics, basically. So what we developed for our system is called American Viticultural Areas, also known as an AVA, but it's also known as an appellation. So it's a designated grape growing region that distinguished by geographical features, and then the boundaries of which have been recognized by the TTB. So this is elevation, soil type, climate. This is, what else do we have? Average rainfall, growing degree days. All these components come together where you can designate a region as an AVA. So that's kind of why you see all these AVAs being established in the 80s. And these are some general broad AVAs. There are sub-AVAs within AVAs, and there are a lot in California. Some people say there's too many AVAs, but that's up for you to decide. So then comes into play the Alcohol and Tobacco Trade and Tax Bureau, also known as the TTB. So the big dogs for alcohol in the United States. So they collect taxes on alcohol, but also tobacco and firearms. They help to regulate the industry to ensure safety and education to consumers and honesty of business. So everything you add to your wine has to be disclosed to the TTB. This is for safety of consumption for consumers and just keeping wineries honest. This wasn't in the United States, this is actually in Austria. There was a huge scandal where, I think it was during the 80s or maybe the 70s, someone will have to fact check me, winemakers were adding, antifreeze. They're adding antifreeze to their wines because antifreeze tastes sweet and it has this very viscous mouthfeel, and antifreeze is quite literally toxic. So the stock for Austrian wine dropped overnight, and it took many decades for anyone to trust wine from that country again. But this is why we have systems in place and we have regulations on these things, because we don't want to be selling beverages that are toxic for people. That's not great. Also, it's to help prevent improper labeling and false advertisement to consumers. So we have the Surgeon's General Warning for alcohol, which is this lovely warning that we see on every alcoholic beverage, but on many things, according to the Surgeon General. Women should not drink alcoholic beverages during pregnancy because of the risk of birth defects, and then it impairs your ability to drive a car or operate machinery and may cause health problems. So there's that. If you'd like to learn about the TTB history, I did link it in here. It has actually a lot to do with the Homeland Security Act and 9/11, which is kind of interesting, but not on the quiz. So up to you if you'd like to learn more. For the United States every country has its own like legal system and requirements and labeling requirements specifically too. So for the United States, we have a couple different percentages, and if this helps you, it helps me, and I should probably rearrange this. So we have 100, 95, 85, 75. Okay, so that's how I kind of break it down. 100, 95, 85, 75. So 100% of the wine has to come from California if you claim it's California wine on the label. 100%. Estate has to be 100% of the grapes must be grown on the estate property. So you own the property those grapes grow on. It also works for property that you lease and manage yourself. So you technically own that through a lease, like your name's on those documents. So that's estate. For vintage, 95% of the wine has to be of that specified vintage. So if it's like a 2020 Barbera, 95% of that wine had to be from the 2020 vintage. 5% could have been a 2018, 2017, 2016, etc. Then we have vineyard designation. 95% has to come from that vineyard. So for example, a Boger, they have the Walker Vineyard Zinfandel. At least 95% of that fruit had to come from Walker. So it could be 100%, but at least 95% had to come from that specific vineyard. Then we have AVA, which is 85%. So if we wanted to claim El Dorado AVA, Sierra Foothills AVA, Stag's Leap District, 85% has to come from that designated grape growing region. Then for variety, only 75, I say only, it's still a large percentage, 75% has to be that variety. So again, a 2020 Barbera, 75% of that wine at least has to be Barbera. It could be 100%, but at least 75 has to be. That means up to 25% of that wine could be anything else. So cool. We have a little link if you'd like to do some more reading about that, but I think that goes over that well. Next we have how to read a wine label. So in the United States, I think a lot of us are pretty well versed with this, but we have our wine producer or our brand name. So this is Jax or Jaxie, who knows. We have a special designation, reserve. So there's no actual legal definition for reserve in the United States. There are in other countries, like especially Spain and Italy, etc. And so it's just a special designation, just says that there's special qualities about this wine. For reserve specifically, you'd have to ask the winery what that means to them. Typically, it's aged longer. Maybe it's in specially selected oak. It could mean a number of things, but there's no legal obligation for that to mean one specific thing in the United States. Then we have the vintage. The vintage is the year that the grapes were harvested. So think of it as the year the grapes were born. Like my birthday, some of you probably don't want to know. Think about the year that you were born. The year that the grapes came off the vine and the year they were born is the vintage of that wine. It's not the year that the wine was bottled. It's the year the grapes were harvested. And then estate bottled would mean 100% of the grapes grown, crushed, fermented, finished, and bottled on the same property, which matters to some people and maybe not others. We have the grape variety, Cabernet Sauvignon. Then we have, I love this, the fanciful name. A fanciful name is a very fun way to market wine. It's very marketing driven, but it's very effective because it's something that's easily recognizable and memorable for consumers. So if, say, this winery has a special, maybe it has a haunted house on the property, or maybe the vineyard has some kind of story that's enticing that people like. So Ghost Story is a fanciful name to maybe separate this cab from another cab that they have. Maybe they have a cab that tastes different, and so they wanted to create two different labels, and this is how they kept them apart. Could be lots of things, but that's the fanciful name. You'll hear me refer to that in some of our tastings. Then we have a vineyard designation, the Jax Estate Vineyard. We have the appellation of origin. So we have St. Helena, Napa Valley, and alcohol content, of course. So that kind of covers most of the United States wine labels. Cool. So diving in, we'll just do a quick overview of California. California is a driving force of all U.S. wine production. You live in a good state. If you like wine, you're in a good place. That's all I could say. 90% of the United States wine is made in California, amounting to around 250 million cases annually. These numbers will start to decline now that the industry is kind of in a bad spot as of this year. Lots of cutbacks, lots of vineyards being pulled out. So you're going to see this number start to drop, unless unless Taylor Swift starts a wine company and somehow every Gen Z and millennial person is going to want to be into wine again. I don't know. Taylor Swift might just have to come save us or someone big and popular that can influence generations. Okay, we have lots of history with wine with our missions in the gold rush. Climate, we are classified Mediterranean climate. Areas closer to the Sierras have hotter summers and colder winters than the coastal areas. But we also have 16 different climate zones in California. Sierra Foothills falls mostly under Zone 12. Napa Sonoma falls under Zone 2. If you are a plant nerd, you will know these things, and you can actually select which plants would grow best in your region depending on your climate zone, which is kind of cool. We also contain world famous Napa wine regions, Sonoma coastal wines, as well as the Sierra Foothills. And we have a very diverse portfolio of all of the different types of grape varieties that we produce here. So I said, just in the Sierra Foothills, over 75 different grape varieties. That's just crazy. If you're interested in more of this, check out Viti 306, Wines of California. We actually dive into each of the major wine regions in California in that class instead of like this class, Wines of the World. Much more concentrated area. So we have some broad areas. This is the Central Valley, this big long strip in the center. Sierra Foothills, we have Napa, Sonoma. Oh, yeah, you can see my mouse. Good. We have the North Central Coast, South Central Coast, and Mendocino Lake County up here too. So lots of fun stuff. LA is also becoming big, Santa Barbara, and then we also have Temecula is one of the newer regions as well. So honestly, the California is just crazy. For the Sierra Foothills specifically, Sierra Foothills is a huge span of AVA, and then we have sub-AVAs within the Sierra Foothills. It follows the Sierra Nevada mountain range, so that's why it's called the Sierra Foothills AVA. We have North Yuba, they're their own AVA. El Dorado and Teal here. Fairplay, which is a subset within El Dorado, but they have the highest average elevation in this little spot here. Then we have the California Shenandoah Valley and Fiddletown. These are in Amador County. So pretty cool stuff. And then we have much more. But yeah, Sierra Foothills. On March 9th, 2022, we also just granted the San Luis Obispo Coast AVA, which covers Arroyo Grande, Edna Valley, Pismo Beach, Avila Beach, and like all this wonderful stuff here. So it kind of hugs the Paso AVA, but this is the much more coastal region. If you want to read into that, I have that too. So that's very exciting. Cool. So let's go ahead and jump into some other states. Oregon. Oregon is a great wine region, especially if you like Pinot Noir. It's a nice lighter red. 2/3 of the state's production comes from Willamette Valley. There's actually Willamette Wineworks in Folsom. They do have Pinot from those regions, and it's very good. So if you're interested, check them out. Nice folks. Great food. And it's right on top of Scott's Seafood on Sutter Street. So definitely check them out. It's a nice place. Currently in Oregon, there's over 20,000 acres planted, mostly Pinot Noir, but they also produce Chardonnay and Riesling, and in some parts, too, you can even find Malbec, but that's more inland. This is a very cool climate, and that's why we see grapes like Chardonnay, Riesling, and Pinot Noirs are typically varieties that do very well in cool climates, so Oregon is just the perfect place for that. With that cool climate, the grapes ripen slowly, and so they develop more complexity. So they just become more mature and develop more of a aromatic profile than something that ripened too fast. So very, very beautiful region. You can see we have Willamette Valley, Umpqua, Rogue, and Applegate. Willamette is one of the most well-known one. ones, but then we also have, this is a really interesting AVA, Walla Walla is actually on the border. So Walla Walla AVA is actually shared between Oregon and Washington State. So if you might have a wine from Walla Walla and it might be from Washington or it might be from Oregon. So that's kind of a fun little AVA there. Cool. So just go ahead and move up north to Washington. Washington is even cooler than Oregon, climate-wise speaking. I like both states very much. Most of the vineyards are located in like the eastern part of the states where it's warmer. So like Walla Walla, we'll see here in a moment, I'm sure some other maps. Most of these grapevines are planted on their own rootstocks and they're not grafted. They're typically known for white wines. So you'll see Gewürztraminer, which is German, ice wines, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah, Riesling. So there's the reds there. And then Riesling is a white, of course. So in the 2000s, Washington State actually claimed the best Riesling in the country, which is amazing. But they also have lots of other popular wines too. They have Malbec, Semillon, Viognier, fruit wines, Syrah, Sauvignon Blanc, etc. There's a great diversity there too. But if you're looking for a crispy white or a bold red, they're very good. I also just did a Syrah tasting from Washington State, and from the eastern portion of Washington State, there are some, and I don't like Syrah. I like the Syrahs from Washington. Very good. So definitely recommend checking it out. So here's kind of a map of what we got going on. So yeah, you can see we have like the cooler climate by the Puget Sound in Seattle here. This is going to be where the coldest air funnels in and we get the most fog and the most depressing weather. Beautiful in the summer. It's all beautiful in the summer. That's where you get a lot of your cooler climate white varieties like Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc. Then as we move to Columbia, Rattlesnake, and Walla Walla, here we're going to get more of our reds. It's going to be drier. We're here with the Cascade Mountains, so higher elevation, drier, and warmer too. So very fun wine region. And Seattle is just so cool. Okay. Move into a completely different climate, both temperature and politically. We have Texas. Hey now. May have been one of the earliest states to have wine grapes due to the Franciscan monks planting mission grapes, right? It is the largest of the 48 contiguous states, but only has around 35 acres of wine grapes planted. It's very harsh, dry, and extreme heat, followed by flash flooding and severe storms, and freezing make it very difficult to make wine. We so far have 3 main wine producing areas: Texas Hill Country, High Plains, and Trans-Pecos, which we have here. So this was taken from the Wine Bible, and it could have been updated by now. The wine industry changes on a dime, so there could be some more industries in here, but this is when that book was published. So we have High Plains, Texas Hill Country, and then the Trans-Pecos here. I've been to Texas Hill Country. Interestingly enough, the wineries that I saw in that area were very wedding venue focused, so fantastically beautiful, large, scenic winery settings made for events. And had some very good wines too, but definitely event focused. It was interesting, but gorgeous. Okay, then we're going to move all the way to the East Coast in New York State. So we have 3 major wine regions here: the Hudson River Valley, the Finger Lakes, and Long Island. So the Finger Lakes is the fastest growing region and accounts for almost half of the total wines in New York State. So they have very cool climates, producing lively sparkling wines, late harvest, and ice wines. I know I mentioned ice wines in Washington too, Washington State. And if you don't know already, ice wine is something that was created in Germany, but it's a process where during the end of harvest, it gets so cold that it actually freezes outside and freezes the grapes, and water freezes before sugar does. And so what you get is when you harvest the grapes frozen and you put them into a press, you press out all that juice. That juice is super duper sugar concentrated at that point because all the water is still ice. So you take that juice and produce a wine. It's a sweet wine. It's called an ice wine. Very specialty, very expensive, very difficult to make. So that's what an ice wine is, essentially. So now you know. Very delicious. So New York State's been producing Vitis vinifera grapes for a long time, but the past 2 generations, they've been creating an array of Native American grapes and hybrids. This is because it's so freaking cold over there. So hybrids are a very big deal on the East Coast. There's a huge push to create them over there, so that way they can have a wine industry too. Long Island is a little bit different. It's a warmer region than other parts of New York, and it grows upcoming Cab Franc and Cab Sauv varieties. They're closer to medium-bodied, sleek Bordeaux wine than a California wine. So more of a European style than that bold, ripe California reds. Even California is starting to move a little bit too. I'm seeing a movement in the Sierra foothills towards lower alcohol, sleek, nuanced wines. So very interesting. Cool. New York State wine regions. We have the Finger Lakes. Dun, dun, dun. Hudson River Valley here, Long Island, Lake Erie. It's very interesting to see, what becomes of what. So with these hybrid grapes, if you go visit to New York, you're going to see a lot of things that are very different and interesting. So Catawba is a fun one. And this has components of grape, surprise, watermelon candy, strawberry jam, violet, and petrol, which is very, very interesting. So this is a wine that's typically served off-dry. It's medium body, low tannin, medium to high acidity, and around 10 to 11.5% alcohol. So just another interesting wine region to visit. And we actually do have some wines from New York that will be tasting in class from Bully Hill. So most commonly, you're going to see things that you recognize: Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, Chardonnay, etc. But Baco Noir, Catawba, Cayuga, Niagara, Ricatatelli, that's actually a Georgian grape variety, Sauvignon Blanc, Vidal, and then I don't know how to pronounce this last one, but these are not varieties, minus Ricatatelli and Gewürztraminer. You're not going to find that in California. I don't think anyone in California produces those. So it's just very intriguing. Cool. Then we have Hawaii. Last but very much not least. So Hawaii actually has its own grapes, and they also just granted their own AVA in 2021 called Ulu Palakua. It's on Maui, and it was put up to Mark Beeman. He's a winemaker at Maui Wine. And if you get a chance to visit Maui and go to the winery, it's gorgeous. They do fantastic wine tastings. We're actually going to taste their sparkling pineapple wine in class, along with a GSM blend, so Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre. And so I'm very excited to share that with you guys. And so those grapes were actually grown on Maui as well. So if you want to learn more about Hawaiian wine or Maui wine specifically, check out these websites. Cool. And yeah, the Ulu Palakua AVA is located right here. Awesome. Okie dokie. Well, that concludes wines of the United States. Not every lecture is going to be so detailed about like history of the regions and stuff. So this is a little bit different than our other lectures, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, send me an email, and look forward to doing the tasting, and I will see you guys soon.